you for bringing me down here to your beautiful community. I was flying in, the greens were really popping, and the big trees and everything. It's just gorgeous down here, and I too live in a beautiful place. You're probably wondering, what's this photo have to do with anything? This photo is the municipality of Anchorage, okay? The municipality of Anchorage is large, it's like county size, and only about 10% of it is occupied. And so what we got going on here is we have extreme vertical relief. We're talking from the valley floor to these summits is over 6,000 vertical feet. This ridge line right here, it's a vertical mile down this way, and it's a vertical mile down on the other side. So when you're standing on the summit of that peak, it is a very spectacular place to be. And if you live in a place with such extreme vertical relief, the wheels should probably start turning, you know? What's going on here? Like flying in, your big volcanoes, right? Those big volcanoes tell a story. Just a little blurb here. November 30th, 2018, the earthquake. So the municipality of Anchorage, 300,000 people, 1,700 square miles, less than 10% of it is occupied by humans. The population, so the population of Anchorage is concentrated in the Anchorage Bowl, but the municipality, as we'll see in another slide, encompasses this whole thing. That photo I just showed you was taken right here, looking in this direction. So here's a tighter view of the municipality. So out of the 300,000 people, maybe close to 200,000 of them are in this area. The pink is the boundary of the municipality of Anchorage. The green is we have a building safety service area. And what that means is you're only required to get building permits inside the building safety service area. And everything outside the building safety service area is the Wild West. You're only required to get a land use permit. And so we got building people in the room, and a building permit is two things. It's plan review and inspection. That's what you're paying for when you go through. And in Anchorage, we live in a very seismically active place. And because of that, we've evolved to doing a very thorough structural review. And we get a lot of heat for that structural review. And any of these jurisdictions in here that do structural review, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for me, we do structural, architectural, fire, life safety, plumbing, mechanical, electrical reviews. The structural review is by far the most important review that we do. Before I go too far here, so here's a photo. I'm up on the mountains on the east side of town, looking westward. This is the Anchorage Bowl. The airport's out here. The downtown is right here. And this is my backyard. I live like right about there. And I mean, people probably wonder, well, why do you live in one of the most seismically active places on the planet? And for one, it's gorgeous, and two, I can do 4,500 feet of vertical in my backyard in a few hours. Okay, some more extreme vertical relief. This photo is taken from my house. I'm shooting north, and you probably all know what this is. This is Denali, and so right here is the ocean, 20,000 feet of vertical relief. Plate tectonics, right? So November 30th, 2018 is about 8:30 in the morning. Who all in here has been through a significant earthquake? Okay. So Anchorage is, South Central Alaska is pretty so seismically active that I would say on average, we have at least one earthquake a year that we feel. And after a while I learned that you can hear them coming. If you hear the dull roar of a freight train and you're sitting in an office building, you're about ready to have an earthquake. You know, it's coming. And then some of the bigger earthquakes you can distinguish between the P wave and the S wave. And the bigger that distinction probably is going to be the bigger the earthquake. And so it was like, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning. My lead structural inspector stops into my office to download some information with me, and all of a sudden just boom, just like ringing a bell. And we both just look at each other. And the time lapse wasn't that long, but it seemed like it was forever. It was like, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it, and then the S waves came. And all of a sudden we're moving north, south, north, south, north, south. And I've got like a 43-inch monitor and a 28-inch monitor on my stand-up desk. And you're supposed to dive under your desk, right? No, it's like, I instantly realized I need these things. So I'm standing there holding them, watching the drop ceiling, waiting for stuff to fall through it. While my structural inspector's standing in the doorway bracing himself. So this goes on for about a half of a minute. And immediately, what do you do right when it ends? I text my daughters who are freshmen in high school. And my one daughter tells me she gets my text before the building even stops shaking. It's like, are you all right? They're okay. Immediately start running around the building to see how much damage has been done. Fortunately, our permitting building is on good ground and it's only a 2-story building. We had, drop ceiling failures. We had some pipe breaks, whatnot. But for the most part, it was pretty good. So the epicenter for this earthquake was pretty deep at 29 miles, which is typical for these megathrust type of earthquakes. But it was only 8 miles from downtown Anchorage. So if you visualize it, it's almost like we're on top of the tear, Widespread damage, you can read all that. It basically affected more than half the people that live in Alaska. So when we're running around the building, just trying to survey the damage, a 5.8 aftershock hits. And it was like, oh, here we go again. And it was a big aftershock. It shook pretty good. So probably in the next half hour, everybody's figuring out what to do. What do? You just had, you've just really been shook. The school district, they've got 80-some buildings in Anchorage. They figure out we got to shut school down. Parents got to come get your kids. So I get a text, got to go pick up my girls. Everybody's on the roads at once. The traffic lights aren't working because the power's out. They broadcast a tsunami warning. People are all scrambling for higher ground. I live on higher ground. I pick up my daughters. I'm trying to take them home. Everybody's driving for the hillside, waiting for the tsunami to hit. Anchorage is not subject to tsunamis, so I know this is a false warning. It's Cook Inlet's not deep enough, basically, to create a tsunami. But anyway, we get through the chaos, get the girls at home. One of the really interesting things about it too that I'd never thought about was for probably the next several hours, there was just this dull rumble, just this boom, boom. You could almost just feel like the earth is moving. It's like it's seeking equilibrium. For as big as the earthquake was, it was amazing. There were no fatalities or serious injuries, but we went through aftershocks obviously for quite some time. I'm not going to show a bunch of pictures of the damage and everything, but there's a real thorough report on it by the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. If you just Google that, you'll find it. And then the big thing was, you know, we all thought we'd had the big one, right? But we didn't. Our design earthquake has a peak ground acceleration of about 0.5 G. The average peak ground acceleration for this earthquake was around 0.3 G. The Anchorage Bowl, which, as we saw in the picture, this is the Anchorage Bowl, was heavily instrumented. There was like 30 strong motion sensors scattered throughout the Anchorage Bowl recording the earthquake. Those strong motion sensors, the data from them, allowed the geotechs to create this map. And these are peak ground accelerations, like 0.2 G, 0.47 G. And here's another thing I never realized about an earthquake. I kind of thought, like, yeah, an earthquake hits, everybody shakes the same. And it's, no, everybody has their own earthquake. Everybody has a unique earthquake. This 0.56 G, that's up on really good ground. Probably, you know, shallow bedrock. Bedrock and really hard soils transmit energy pretty well, you know. Your softer soils and whatnot can actually absorb energy, and you're seeing some of that going on there. But, so it must be, and I'm not an expert on this, but it must be like the variation in the soil types that can really kind of affect the ground accelerations. So when engineers design buildings to resist earthquakes, they design buildings to resist ground acceleration. They don't design for time, right? They don't design for the duration that the earthquake shakes. And that matters. That's a super relevant variable. But I think it probably overcomplicates the analysis so much that they've dumbed it down, and we basically design for acceleration. So 1964, that was the big one. It shook for 4.5 minutes. The magnitude, the 9, that's just a measure of the amount of energy released. So what really matters is how much energy was released, but also how deep was it and how close was it to you. So that's another just nuts feature. 600 miles of earth ruptured. And the epicenter was about 15 miles deep and 75 miles northwest of Anchorage. So I'm standing above the town of Whittier. I'm about 45-ish miles east of Anchorage, and I'm looking out into Prince William Sound. We're about 3,500 feet above the water. The epicenter for the '64 earthquake was somewhere out here, and the rip in the earth went all the way through Prince William Sound, under the Kenai Peninsula, and down towards Kodiak. So a 600-mile rip would be the entire state of Oregon, the entire state of Washington, and up into Canada a ways. So in Anchorage, after a couple of minutes of shaking, some large blocks of earth started to move. And it was a result of liquefaction of soil. And these blocks of earth, they're pretty thick. They're like 100 to 200 feet thick. One was like about 1.5 miles wide, extended. And so that Turnagain landslide was the biggest block of earth, and it just started flowing out to sea. And there were some 75 houses on it that were totally destroyed. And most of the deaths in Anchorage happened on the Turnagain landslide. The L Street slide, a smaller block of earth again started flowing, in this case westward out to sea, and it opened up a big graben, which got this block flowing out. Something's got to give. And so this big trench in the earth opened up. So 1964, most damage soil failures, 215 homes destroyed. The thing I really found amazing was well-constructed wood buildings had minimal damage. That is nuts. To get shaken that hard for that long. And they estimate the return period on that earthquake of around 700 years. So, does that mean Anchorage isn't going to get another big one for 700 years? No. We're just not going to get that big one in 700 years. So, how our building department is structured? We have a development services department. I see that terminology is very common through cities. It's kind of like watered down soft language that we're going to regulate your buildings, right? And we have private development, land use enforcement, right-of-way enforcement, and building safety. I'm building safety. And we administer and perform the ATC 20 post-evaluation process, coordinate with the Emergency Operations Center. But really our big thing, our day job is enforcing building codes. And my day job is I'm the engineering services manager and I'm over plan review. I'm also over our on-site water and wastewater section, wells and septics for homes. And depending on how much work's coming in, I have anywhere from 3 to 5 structural engineers working for me. And then I have 3 other plan reviewers doing a mix of architectural, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical review. We also have a chief of inspections, and we have 7 structural inspectors who are out there looking at structural issues and architectural, fire, life safety issues, 5 plumbing, mechanical, 5 electrical, 3 elevator inspectors because we do maintenance inspections on elevators, and we have 4 code abatement inspectors who are going out and inspecting damaged buildings, rundown buildings, dealing with slumlords, that type of stuff. Anchorage has historically followed the 3-year code adoption process. We were adopting the uniform codes all the way up till 2003 when we adopted the International Building Code. And we skipped the 2015 code, and we're on the 2018 I codes right now: International Building Code, International Existing Building Code, International Fire Code, International Mechanical Code. You get the whole rundown. And the 3-year code cycle, ICC likes it. As a jurisdiction, I hate it because I don't think ICC gets that when you adopt a code, they're adopted by your city council or your assembly as regulations. And so each time you go through that process, you open up your code to the politicians who are being heavily lobbied by your local home builders association and whatnot. So I've kind of pushed us on to skipping codes. Another shot of Anchorage. This is probably within, 2 hours walk of my house. ATC 20 prep/training. Would you rather I do this in the second session, or how good am I on time?
You're fine. You have 15 more minutes, but...
Okay. So, when the earthquake hit in 2018, some of our staff had some ATC 20 training, right? And I would recommend that a jurisdiction probably set up some sort of schedule to do this every 3 to 5 years. This is really challenging because you're trying to plan for something that's most likely never going to happen. There's probably a 99% chance it's not going to happen while you're working for your local, city. And in regards to who does the evaluations, that little quick manual even says this, is that it needs to be limited to people with the proper training and experience. And so in Anchorage, only our structural engineers, our structural plan reviewers, and our structural inspectors are out there doing these evaluations. The quick evaluation, which will, if there's damage, will lead into the detailed evaluation, generally is how it worked for us. Okay. So, planning. And I'm going to take a step way back, because the most important piece of planning is to actually build a resilient community to begin with. And to build a resilient community to begin with requires an independent third-party plan review and inspection process. Structural plan review and inspection process, meaning building permits. And it sounds like Portland itself really has it going on. It sounds like, you guys have, structural plan review, structural inspectors, very experienced, know what you're doing. You get into some of your smaller jurisdictions though, and it can really be hit and miss. Again, in planning, it's important to know the soils in your community, because that's really, they're probably like the most important factor, in my opinion, in terms of how much damage you're going to see. Because if you've got bad soils, liquefiable soils and whatnot, even if you have a really well-built structure on it, that structure is going to probably sink or tilt or do whatever. But that excludes non-ductile buildings, which it sounds like Portland does have a lot of unreinforced masonry. So that's a very serious deal. And so what I would guess that you probably have this already, but have maps of your soil types for your community. And note if you have any liquefiable soils, where they're at. And then the next thing is kind of like, well, what kind of building, if we do have the liquefied or the bad soils, what kind of buildings and what kind of foundations are sitting on those bad soils? If they're deep pile foundations, that's probably the best type of foundation. In Anchorage, when they're building on the bad soil, it's popular now to do these concrete mats, where you have basically a continuous slab of concrete under the building that's 3 feet to 5 feet thick, that's reinforced with a bunch of reinforcing steel, such that if the ground does fail, the building's kind of like a big boat. It'll tilt and do whatever, and it's not going to fall apart. So here's a map of Anchorage soil. We got the mountains over here. So all this green stuff is the best soil. It's shallow bedrock, basically. And then we transition with shallow bedrock. We also got a lot of really rock hard glacial till. At one time there's this massive glacier sitting on top of all this stuff, and it just compacted the soil very well. Now we're down into the bowl. We're down into the flatlands. And we really got hit and miss soil types. We have these huge mud flats, which are silt, which is a very fine sand that go around the city. This reddish color is the worst ground. High probability of ground failure during a seismic event. The yellow is the next highest probability, the orange. And then we go to the yellow, then we go to the green. So we've got kind of like a ridge of good ground out here on this tip. In this area of the yellow, during the 2018 earthquake, we have a lot of really fine silty soil in this area. And I think I figured out how it got there. And the key takeaway of this fine silty soil is the soil grains are all roughly the same size, right? And that's known as a poorly graded soil because you can't compact it. It's like trying to compact marbles. They're not going to lock together because they're all the same size. A well-graded soil is a soil of all different particle sizes that locks together. So we didn't really realize what would happen with this in an earthquake, but we had around 500 houses sink in the 2018 earthquake on this silty soil. And a lot of them only sunk a few inches. But of course, they're not going to just go down perfectly uniform. They're going to tilt or whatever. And to this day, we're still issuing building permits to level houses in this area. This is the Turnagain landslide. This is where this big block of earth just started flowing out to sea and falling apart as it was flowing. This is the L Street slide, another block that flowed this way. We also had a ground failure over here in Government Hill. And then there's also historic landslides that the geologists can look at Anchorage and they can look back in time 2,000, 5,000 years and see signs of old landslides from old big earthquakes. So how did we get all these soil particles in here that are all roughly the same size? And my guess is it was wind transport, because we get strong prevailing southeasterly winds that come this direction. They pick the sand and the silt up off the mud flats, and they blow it all, and when I'm talking through thousands of years, we're blowing it and compacting it, and of course the wind is going to transport particles of a certain size. That's my theory anyway. Let's see. Buildings. Obviously know the buildings in your community. Where are your vulnerable buildings? Non-ductile soft stories. We talked a little bit about the PIMA P154 rapid screening processes, kind of like a good quick way to get an idea of what you're dealing with there.
Ross, did you do that? Did you guys do the P154?
Yeah, we've done it a couple of times. I think it's actually fun. It's interesting.
But do you do them for all of your buildings?
Oh, no. I mean, we've done training. We haven't. Anchorage really, we do not have a lot of soft stories, and we have virtually I think we have no unreinforced masonry. And probably because any unreinforced masonry we had before 1964 is no longer there. And yeah, and they didn't build it after that. Communication. This is a huge one. Your best bet is going to be cell phone communication. So my recommendation would be to work with your local carriers just to see how resilient their infrastructure is. When Verizon came to Anchorage 10 years ago or so, I was really impressed with the facility they built. I mean, they built a facility way beyond what code required. They were clearly out to survive Armageddon, And our cellular network did stay up during and after the earthquake. The only problem it had was too much traffic on it. And so the thing is like, if you are ever hit with a natural disaster, communicate to the community to text, don't call. Because texts take way less bandwidth.
Do you have an ability to focus only on certain numbers that are part of the emergency response that you can have set up?
I don't know. That'd be a great question for them. This is an obvious one. Maintain a list of local volunteer structural engineers who assist with the evaluation process. And I think you guys are already doing this. Coordinate with your hospitals, your large corporations, your school districts, police departments, because typically these entities will have structural engineering firms on retainer or firms that they work with. And it sounds like Oregon has a much more formal process for this, and Anchorage, it's more like, it's much less formal. Providence Hospital. Do you have a structural engineer on retainer? Yes, we do. Okay.
We're going to discuss that kind of later in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. The more formal.
Yeah, and I guess I should caveat the disclaimer. This is more like a discussion of our experience. This isn't necessarily like how you should do it or how it should be done. This is how we did it. We could have done it better. Yeah. It's nice to have the placards ready to go. have the ATC manuals ready to go. Right after the event, you're likely not going to be able to get gas unless your city has its own gas supply for its own municipal vehicles and whatnot. So if your car's sitting on empty, as mine was, it's not a good thing. Maintain a list of critical facilities, obviously. Record keeping. And I mentioned this earlier, and it's hard to invest in software for something that's likely not going to happen. Yeah. So, in our case, well, I'll get to it later.
I think we can discuss some of these things when you get into the down and dirty part
Yeah.
of exactly how you do that.
Yeah, initially we started using our permit tracking software to track our damage assessments, or not damage assessments, building evaluations, excuse me. And that was cumbersome, so we switched to Orion. It was amazingly quick and easy to switch to Orion.
Does Alaska set up an earthquake clearinghouse after an earthquake?
No, not the, and I'm not talking about like any of the FEMA stuff. This is all just independent of FEMA. This is just building evaluations. Gear. Given that things expire, the best thing to do when you think gear is to use things that you use regularly, because you know it's going to work. So in early 2000, we
Ross.
started. Yep.
Sorry, will you go back to the slide before this? Because there's that point at the bottom about before this slide, where not letting the IT department destroy your data. I think that's important to discuss how that goes, since IT will be different.
Yeah, so basically, you know, we bought the Orion software and we used it, and we collected, you know, over 3,000 evaluations and had all that information in there. And then Orion was like, okay, we want X amount of dollars per year for you to maintain your, you know, subscription or whatever. And our IT department was like, no, we're not going to do that, given that this might be, you know, 100 years before we have another earthquake where we need it. So we're going to get rid of Orion, and they did, and they dumped our data too with it. So
They dumped your building safety evaluation data, or not your?
well, we still have it, just not in an as usable format, right? It would take a very manual type of exercise to go through all that information and do anything with it. Yeah.
So, Ross, do you have, I'm thinking that some of this is getting really detailed, and we could do this in that next session, or do you have a place where you want to get to?
That's all I was going to say about that for right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, we put together backpacks, and we put all this stuff in it, and we stuck it all away in a closet, you know, waiting for the big one. And we printed out maps and all this stuff here, and fast forward 18 years, so our forms and manuals were not the latest version. I mean, they're good enough, but they weren't the latest version, so we replaced them. All the batteries restored, of course, were no good. Hard hats even expire, yeah, per OSHA anyway. The tape wasn't good. Any, you know, like your nylon and your elastic type of stuff degrades over time, and it wasn't good. We had the old style flashlights in there versus the new LED stuff, and so we just tossed all that. And this is probably a good stopping point. This is again Lake Eklutna, Anchorage's drinking water. Anchorage's drinking water comes from snow and ice melt from the Eklutna Glacier and rain. And all I'll say about that is it's good to be upstream. Nobody has to flush for you to drink. And I'll do this part in the next series.
Okay.